Hello. My name is Josephine Jackson Hubbard. I was born on the 7th of November 1882 in Greencastle, Indiana, and graduated from Shortridge High School in Indianapolis. I first saw Kin in April 1902. I was 20, and was attending a baseball game with Ray, my fiancé at the time. He was trying to explain some of the finer points of the game to me, when I spotted a man on the sidelines. I thought that he looked interesting. I liked the way that he wore his hair slicked straight back, without any part. He wasn't very tall, and he was older than I was, but he was very handsome. I asked Ray who he was, and he told me that his name was Kin Hubbard and that he worked for the Indianapolis News, drawing pictures. Ray told me that if I really wanted to learn about baseball, I should be looking at the players instead of the spectators. When I told Father that I was going to marry Kin instead of Ray, he was not best pleased. He said that Kin looked too much like an actor. When I told Kin what Father had said, he said it was the nicest compliment he had ever received. You know, it's funny. When he was younger, Kin was always writing and performing in minstrel shows, but when he was called upon to go up on stage as himself, he couldn't do it. He just got too nervous. There was a time when we went down to Columbus one night. He was supposed to make some drawings for some benefit. They had a pencil and some big sheets of paper on a board, but Kin got so nervous that he couldn't find his chalk. It was right there in his left hand, but he didn't know it. When we got out of there, he said to me, "That's the last time I'll ever do anything like that, and don't ever you ask me." They had paid him $100 for it, so I told him, "Give me that $100, he said. "Why?" I said, "Because you got money under false pretenses." You wasn't a bit funny. We laughed about that all the way home, but he never tried that again. He couldn't do those things. He just couldn't. I suppose that it was rather ironic that he would write about people and yet still not want to meet them. He would rather be an observer. His first job was working for his father, in the post office back in Ohio. He liked that. Lots of girls would come in to see him, and he met all of the characters in town. I think many of those people became the residents of Brown County for Abe Martin. Kin started Abe Martin back in 1904, I think. It was an accident. He just made a picture and commented on it and did this for several days. The managing editor at the News didn't like it, thought it should be cancelled, but Kin just kept on. The public loved it. He was quoted quite heavily everywhere. He decided to set Abe Martin in Brown County because of the topography there. He'd never been there until 1911. To tell you the truth, I think he was afraid to go to Brown County. In the early days, the folks there thought he was making fun of them, and they resented it. Once our car broke down in Brown County one day, and Kin said to me, "Tiny," that was his nickname for me, 'cause I was as tall as he was, "don't mention my name, call me Henry." He was afraid if they found out who he was they wouldn't help us. So I called him Henry, and we got out of there and made it home, and we didn't go back for a long time. One funny thing about Kin, he never had a pencil or a pad with him. We'd be out and he'd begin looking around, and I knew what he wanted. He wanted a pencil and something to write on. Often, it would be just one word, because these quips would never come back if he'd let them go. He'd think of just one line and say to me, "You write down so and so." And I did. That was the thing about Kin. He could say more in just 2 or 3 words than anyone I ever knew, and you'd be sitting around maybe discussing something and he'd put a different slant on it and you'd just have to stop and laugh. His slant was right, but he was just as funny as he could be. He told me once, I couldn't have written Abe Martin if I hadn't married and had a family. I knew he was right, because everything that happened to me was such good copy, because I was always impetuous, you know. And everything happened to me. He'd just shake his head and laugh. But as successful as Abe Martin was, he wanted to quit drawing it. He was very sick of it. I asked him once what he was going to do. He told me that he didn't know, so he never quit. But that was always on his mind, to quit. It was his friends, like George Ade, who kept him writing Abe Martin. George told him, "Well, Kin, you don't dare quit. You've started something and you've got to go on." Then one day, James Whitcomb Riley took out a pad and a pencil and said to him, "Ken, You'll be surprised what that pencil was going to do for you, and L don't want you ever to talk about quitting again. Kin built us a house in Irvington, right on the corner of Emerson and New York streets. It was up on a hill, so it was hard to cut grass and we couldn't get anyone to do it. No one wanted to mow the grass on the hill. It was too steep, so Kin had to do it himself. That's one reason we left the Emerson house, because the hill was so hard to look after. So in 1928, we moved to 5437 North Meridian Street, and we turned right around and got another hill. Whenever Will Rogers came to town, he would always stop and see Kin first to get a line on what was happening in Indianapolis before he did his show that night. He depended on Kin to give him some hints as to what he might say. After Kin died, Will came to town and I went down to see him at Union Station. As soon as he saw who I was, he got up and he began greeting me his way of always pushing you on the shoulder when he'd talk to you, and started to cry. You don't know what it means to me to come here without seeing Kin. He asked all about the family and the children and about Kin's last days. We had a very nice evening together. Then he got on the train and went back to California. I like to remember that picture of Kin and Will together. Will once said, "You know, if I were as funny as Kin Hubbard, then I'd be one of the 2 funniest men in the world."